So it has been a minute since I have made any videos, and every time I start a video, I keep saying I'll be better about making more videos consistently, and then I never do it. So, in case you didn't know why we're here today, I wrote a book. Did it last year. Well, I published it last year. In November, this book came out. It was great. Had a great time. Filmed a couple TikToks about it because apparently I'm better at filming TikTok videos because they're not as long. And then didn't do much after that. When I was cleaning up around the place, I found a bunch of drafts of my book. The various drafts. And I put them all together because I was like, oh, this would be really cool to be able to look back on sometime, you know, now that it's out there. And I mentioned something about it on a TikTok video, and I kind of offhandedly say, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I did like a draft walkthrough, almost like a sketchbook tour, but of the various drafts that I made. And yeah, that's been kind of in the back of my mind, and I have some time, so I'm gonna go ahead and just go for it. And this isn't just, you know, like a self-promotion thing, mostly because I'm really bad at it. I think that it's really helpful when people who write talk about how they do it, because I feel like writing shouldn't be gate-kept, because obviously everyone has a different creative process, and there's no right or wrong way to write creatively, but sometimes having different skills or having different methods that you know work for some people, maybe it helps you figure out how to do it yourself if you have ideas but you just are having trouble getting them down. So I'm gonna kind of go through my process, and this process was very different because I started writing this when I was like 14-ish. Probably closer to 15, but around 14. So my writing process changed over a decade because you grow as you write. You know, your writing becomes stronger. Your process changes. How you write and why you write and what you want to get across changes. I don't want anyone to watch this and go, wow, that's a lot of, you know, drafts. There's a lot of changes there. Like, am I doing it wrong? Or is that what it's going to be like? Because, you know, I changed a lot. This was just how this project worked for me. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about my writing process now compared to then, but not in this video. We'll do a different video for that. The very, very first thing that had to do with The King's Champion was this school project I had to do. I don't think I still have it. I think that may be the only thing that I don't still have. But that's okay because it wasn't very good. It was a freshman world geography project, okay? Like, it was not going to be stellar. But this is the first document that I ever made for it. It just kind of was the beginning of who are these people that I want to talk about? How do they interact with each other? You know, what do they look like? What's their deal? And so this was the first document. Obviously, it's been very beaten up. I don't know if you can see it, but the tape, yeah, it's bad. It's been beaten up, but it's lasted. It's still here after like 12 years or so. So this was the first bit of writing that came out. And that document is almost nothing like where we ended up. I mean, there are characters that don't even exist. I don't know where they came from. I don't know why they were there. They didn't really serve a purpose. I think I was just trying to find my cast of characters. And that's okay. Sometimes you have to cut characters. And here it is, the first draft. A 70-page notebook with a couple pieces of loose leaf shoved in the front. It's kind of a mess, as you can tell from the doodles on the outside and the way that it is not in super great condition. I carried it around for pretty long time. There's a lot of random stuff in the margins. Nothing to do with the story. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. Doodles. French music. Stuff like that. It was just... I'm not sure I was taking myself too seriously with this first draft. Yeah, this thing is... yeah. Oh! Ooh! So, it actually says that... I don't have a start date on it. I have an idea. It probably would have been 2013. Not 100% sure. But I finished it at 12:07 on January 13th, 2015. And I actually do remember writing that. I was in the cafeteria at my high school, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I was, because I was at lunch and I was sitting by myself because my friends had a different lunch than I did. And so I would write during my lunch, which is probably why this thing is such a mess, because high school cafeterias are gross. But yeah, first draft. And my first draft, I did not plot it. There was no outline. There was just, I had ideas, and so I started stringing a bunch of scenes together. And sometimes as a first draft, that works. Okay, just getting your ideas out of your brain and onto paper. Even if there's not a lot of connective tissue, sometimes just getting the ideas out so that then you can go, okay, I have this scene and this scene. Where do they fit? What's the best way to arrange them? Sometimes that works. For me, I genuinely thought my first draft was great. It was going to be exactly that way through every edit, and it was going to be great. Obviously, I was wrong. I was 15. I was stupid. Duh. Just getting ideas on paper. That was my first draft. Not a lot of planning. Not a lot of thinking. Just writing. Chef does not recommend now, but it worked then. Then I typed it, and it looks like this. I thought this was a whole book. I was very proud of myself. Oh no, this is just part of it. Okay, I was delusional. I was out of my mind. No, this is not the whole book. This is the first 4 chapters. But yeah, the title, Tales of Velier. I felt like at the time, if you're gonna write, you have to have a title first. So I forced a title onto this project, and that's what I came up with. And obviously, it's not very good, because I forced it. Now, though, I feel like not having a title is okay. I let the project inform the title. It wasn't until I was almost at the end of the final draft that I felt like, oh, I've got the title for this. And I felt like the title really fit with what the book was about. What would work for this book? Now when I write, I don't worry about the title. I come up with working titles, which is usually just like a vague kind of idea of what the book is about. Like the duology I'm working on right now, it's just called Immortals Project. It doesn't have a name. Neither one of them do. They're just the Immortals Project 1 and 2. And once I finish them, maybe the titles will come very easily. Maybe I'll have to think about it, but I found that once I had, done the work, the title came. So don't try to force a title. If you have to, give it a silly name, because then, you're having fun with it. Another partial draft with a crappy name. It's the Tales of Velier, again, but with a different spelling, because apparently I couldn't figure out how I wanted it spelled. So partial draft. This one actually is the whole thing. This I thought would be the whole book, start to finish, in chapters. Not good. I mean, it was fine, I guess. It's short, for sure. I don't think that if it was properly formatted, it would be over 100 pages. Probably wouldn't even be 100 pages. This was it. This was my first completed draft, still with a crappy title. Then came a major shift. My writing style changed a lot between the draft that I just showed you and the draft that I'm about to show you. Because I decided to start actually plotting. So this is what I call a plot map, plot arc, I guess, maybe, because it says plot arc on there. It's kind of where are the emotional beats at in this book. So it's not quite a triangle. There are highs, lows, dips, whatever. But it helped me to kind of figure out what am I actually wanting to do here. Basically my first idea was, oh, I want, you know, this king and this knight. I want them to fall in love with each other, but for people to get in the way and them to have to figure out how to make it work. Okay, there has to be more than that. There has to be reasons why it doesn't work, or reasons for this, that, or the other. And that's when I actually sat down and did this. Then I translated that into like a bullet point list. So getting every minutia idea down. We've got our overarching, you know, ideas, but then what's some of the connective tissue there? What little things feel important to add in? So these two things really started to actually develop the ideas, which is nice because having the ideas is great, but if you don't know how to put them together, it makes your life really difficult when you do actually go to, you know, seriously knuckle down and start writing. Then with that came world building stuff. Nobody's probably ever gonna really need this. It doesn't go into the story, but for me, I was like, okay, I need to know what's happened in their history, what's their world like, how does it work, so that when I do start writing the story in context, I know what has happened to influence what is happening. Some people don't have to do that, and that's totally fine. If that doesn't work for you, don't do it. And granted, there were parts of it that I worked in line with when I was writing, going, okay, do I need to know about, you know, the history? Do I need to know about, you know, the magic system? How much do I need to know about it if I do need to know about it? And going kind of back and forth between, okay, what's the world building? What's the story doing? What's the world building? What's the story doing? Sometimes I used the world building exercises to kind of take a break when I was stuck, just kind of get the creativity flowing. For the most part, I found it helpful to have the context of the story when I was writing it. After doing all that work, that's when the big shift happened. It also got a title change. It went from being The Tales of Elia to The King's Boy. Still wasn't 100% happy with that title, but at least it was closer, so I went with it. Of course, this is only one-sided, so I'm sure if I had printed it two-sided, it would look very different. But then we had this as a draft. I mean, there's a lot of various marks in this draft. I still was not happy with it. There was just, I felt like I wasn't getting at what I wanted to. And where the story started, I was not happy with where it started. It has started in so many different places now across these various drafts. And yet I still couldn't figure out, okay, where do we actually start? Another draft, still The King's Boy at this point. Not so much criticism in this one as I knew I was going to be kind of almost starting over after this draft. There are some lines in here and sections that are highlighted. Those were ones I actually thought were worth keeping. So this one was almost like a dump draft to go, okay, I've done all this, just to toss it out. What can I keep? And yeah, it was kind of heartbreaking because I knew it felt like I just kept pushing that finish line further and further away from myself. I knew that by pushing myself and challenging myself to really think about what I was writing and what it meant and what I was saying, that I would be more satisfied at the end, even if I was frustrated and discouraged in the pursuit of it. A decent chunk of these highlighted lines, I think, did actually make it into the final draft, even if it's not exactly word for word the same. But yeah, a decent amount of scenes made it from this draft. Then we have 3 or 4 partials. I'm not going to pull them out because they look very similar to each other, and it'll get confusing. But I kept going back to the beginning over and over, and that's why they're only partials. I kept trying to rework that beginning because I couldn't figure out why the beginning was so bad. And then it kind of hit me. I was dropping everybody in the middle instead of actually developing the story naturally. So a lot of times in fantasy, I have found, just from reading, you either get 2 things. You get a lot of information off the front end all at once, or you kind of get thrown into the world and you just have to go with the attitude, if I'm told something, then that's the way it is, and that's the way it's going to be, move on. There are a lot of writers that both of those 2 methods work for. For me, I was having a hard time finding the story myself as the writer, let alone what a reader was going to think, by throwing it in the middle. And I knew I didn't want to just dump all the information on the front end and just move on, because sometimes that's kind of clunky. So I decided, okay, my character is going to start at the beginning of his story, just like the readers are starting at the beginning of the story. So he goes from already being at court, like all those drafts I just showed you, to arriving there. So the readers are being introduced to court and the world the same way that Espen is being introduced to the court and the world. So it ended up working out in the end, kind of fumbling the beginning for a while, but I don't recommend going back over and over and over and over, because you get stuck like in this cycle where you're so worried about the beginning that you don't make any progress. And I did that. I did that to myself, and I wasted a lot of time being frustrated over the beginning to the point where I wasn't finishing, and I was putting it down or putting it aside and then not picking it back up for a really long time because I was so hyper focused on that beginning. Sometimes you just have to have a bad beginning. You just have to have a bad one, and then you can go back and fix it, which is what I ended up doing. Then came this draft. Now, why is it bound where all of those other ones have been stapled and paper-clipped and everything else? Well, right before I decided to really knuckle down and seriously finish this book, I don't know whether I heard it or I read it, but there was this quote by Neil Gaiman, who I love. I think he's an amazing writer. Not only his storylines, his messages, but his characters are so well developed. And he said that when you write, you need to write your draft by hand and then go to the computer, because it makes a bigger impact when you go to translate it from writing to the computer. You're more aware, you're gonna edit better in the process, and then when it is typed and ready to be edited, you're in a better place. So I decided to try it, and it worked. It really, really worked. There was something about the actual mechanics of writing this whole thing that really kind of unlocked something in my brain. This draft also is the most probably beaten up out of any of them, and the most colorful. Anytime I would have a thought, sticky note. There are even some sticky notes in here that aren't relevant to the story, but I really felt like I needed to remember. There's notes, birthdays, major events, when they happened, why they happened, you know, symbology notes, stuff like that. There is a lot there. So this one is literally written in from the, don't know if you can see it. From the very beginning, I'm dropping papers, hold on. From the very beginning, to the very end, and I even had to take some loose leaf to finish, and I tucked it in there at the end because I ran out of room. And then of course, more notes. I would set myself little goals of story points to get to. Anytime I had an idea, I'd stick a sticky note in there so I wouldn't forget. You know, random world building note. I mean, it's all here. I translated this to a document on the computer, which I never printed out, which is fine, because it turned into this. This is the proof copy. I was not super happy with this because up until this point, this still has it. The book was written in one point of view, and I decided to change the whole thing. It just made the story easier to read, I guess, for me. So I did it. I overhauled it in this proof, got this proof done, and then realized that there was still a whole bunch of mistakes in it. So this even still is bleeding red pen of notes, things that needed to be fixed before it went to final print. And this is actually the first that has the illustrations in it. Granted, they are in black and white, whereas the final version is in color. But I felt each transition needed a little something. And so, yeah, I did some paintings and I put them in there. So, fun fact for you. I do not have an illustrator. Every visual thing that you see from cover to cover, this guy. And all of that brings us here to this lovely, lovely book that I have written. It took me 10 years to write. I'm still shocked and staggered by that number. But I ended up being really, really happy with the work that I did. And yeah, maybe this was helpful. Maybe this walk down memory lane is just self-serving, but if you found any of it helpful, great. You can even use me as the example of what you don't want to do. I'm fine with that. I think writing is something that's very personal. I think too many writers act like their process is some secret to be guarded with their life, and I just don't agree with that. I think that writing is a beautiful art and it should be shared in all its various forms and stages, and I hope that maybe this was informative, fun, something. Go buy my book. It's very good. I'm very proud of it. So that is what I have today. Maybe I'll make more writing process videos. Maybe I'll talk about my process a little bit more. Maybe I'll talk more about future projects that I have coming. I don't know. I'm not gonna make promises. I'm a very busy guy. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you didn't, that's cool. I'm just doing my thing. So, later.